This is the eLearn Podcast, episode number 97.
Probably one of my biggest pet peeves is going to a training, we've all been there, where, it's just an information push. And the presentation that they could have just sent me that. I could have saved myself a lot of time, right?
Welcome to the eLearn Podcast. My name's Ladek, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. My guest for today is Naomi Pusch, a highly experienced senior instructional designer in the public sector and the L&D space. I invited Naomi on the show today after learning more about the types of organizations she delivers for, which, unfortunately for our purposes, they need to remain unnamed. But suffice it to say, we'd all usually consider these organizations highly structured, traditional, and anything but agile. In this very forward-thinking conversation, Naomi and I discuss when she crossed over from a trainer to a designer and the progression that helped her make this transition. We also talk about the distinction between developing learning and designing learning and why simple is almost always better. And a little shout out to Michelle Moore in the podcast, who's also been a guest on the show. We also talk about one of the biggest challenges as an instructional designer. It's not having access to the actual learners, because there's often a client layer in between, and why testing for usability is absolutely critical. Naomi and I also talk about the wide types and varieties of learning materials a designer might be asked to create. It's not just all about creating those click-by-click lessons. But in parallel, we talk about the fact that turnaround time for learning materials is a current limp for L&D professionals. And we talk about what might be done about it. We also talk about why one of the most important questions you can ask about any learning you're developing is, what is the value add of live interaction, and how to maximize the right types of human connections in learning. Naomi and I also talk about how L&D departments can benefit from outside perspectives to find new ways to deliver new technology and really truly innovate in this space. And then finally, we wrap up our conversation by talking about why an agile mindset and process will continue to improve the learning materials that we develop in essentially every single way. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning podcast is sponsored by the eLearn Success Series, a uniquely valuable set of events that bring together sector experts and thought leaders to offer solutions to the most critical challenges and issues at the intersection of education and technology. Get your free ticket to all 4 sessions at elearnsuccessseries.com. And OpenLMS, a company that provides world-class LMS solutions that empower organizations to meet education and workplace learning needs. Learn more by visiting openlms.net.
A super pleasure to have Naomi Pusch with me today, who is an instructional designer who has, I think a pretty fascinating story to tell. And one that I really thought was really interesting when you and I, we had spoken earlier, just kind of talk about this opportunity and, have this conversation. You have both a typical and non-typical path into, the learning space in general. And so I'm excited to hear about some of your successes, your challenges, those kinds of things as well. I like to start all of these conversations by just asking a simple question. Where are you?
I know my camera angle is a little weird. So I'm in a basement, like many people probably over the last in my home office in Portland, Oregon. So I am looking at shockingly a gray sky outside, which is pretty much like quintessential Pacific Northwest.
That's so, yes. We're recording this, for everybody. I mean, we're live. Obviously, people know that, what day we're recording this. But when they hear the recording of this, this is happening on March 31st, 2022, bottom of March here. Looking into, we're about to jump into Q2. What are we going to do?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Can you believe that the first quarter of the year is already gone? And I'm in a closet in Mexico. So that just makes total sense, right? It's just absolutely logical.
Your closet looks really nice, by the way.
If this is what closets in Mexico look like, everyone can come immediately. But yeah, so let's start at the beginning. I'm interested in your story. How did you stumble into the instructional design world? To start kind of start us off from there. Where did you get started?
Okay. Yeah. And stop me. I can talk forever. So,
That's good.
guide me and what you want to hear. But I think I've always had some aspect of education, like I'm the oldest of four and used to force my younger siblings to sit there and be in my school, God knows what I taught them, but they're still doing all right. So it can't have been too bad.
You did not guide them too far astray.
That's right. And I did end up for a few years teaching middle school, which is my absolute favorite age, for a little bit. But that was really my only kind of background. I was actually working in community development, and then just kind of, as I've heard other folks' stories, fell into a training job. And it was a training on software. And I think I learned a lot during that space, that training, like kids education, wouldn't work in an adult learning setting. And I think that was my, the first time I got out there and started training. The senior trainer pulled me aside afterwards and was basically like, you can't talk to them like they're kids. And so I had a huge, kind of learning curve coming into working with adult learners. But pretty quickly over the course of kind of that project, which was a statewide implementation of a custom software system, we had to learn the software ourselves. Then we had to create the curriculum, all the training materials, and then go out and train in 1,200 different municipalities. And then we had to, probably the best opportunity I had was that after training, I went out and helped a lot of these, they were municipal clerks, implement this in their offices. And I think that's probably where the seed of my empathy with the user was developed, because I was able to see the struggles that folks had trying to implement this software, when a lot of them, they didn't even use any kind of, computers. And I mean, we had folks originally taking the mouse and trying to put it on the screen. I mean, this was a while ago, but
wow.
So yeah. So, I think that kind of developed in me. That got me into the training world and was doing mostly classroom training for many years, and then started to morph into more of the e-learning space and creating e-learning, and then, kind of came into this instructional design just through experience. So, I think I started in the software training world 2005, and have been sticking with it ever since.
What was the kind of moment that you crossed over from delivering? I mean, I know you said your kind of the aha moment was, understanding user experience, but crossing over from I'm a trainer to I'm a designer. Is that a thing? Like you've really you're now on you're on the other side of the table now. I hate to divide us up that way, but or what happened there?
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is typical, but yeah, it has kind of evolved into more and more of the design. Like I spend less and less time actually developing learning materials now, and more, designing materials and experiences, and but I do think that was more of a shift. I think it happened through the progression of going from training to e-learning, and then the kind of getting to the point where there were folks who were much faster and better at developing the e-learning than I was. And so became more and more like, well, okay, your skill set is much more in the design space.
Distinguish that for me, because I think that is something that many people don't make a distinction around. Like what are the distinctions between developing learning materials and designing them? Because it sounds, to the layperson, one and the same.
Right. And I think there are people that probably are great in both. I've been enjoying the kind of, in the design phase, like thinking about what is it that really concentrating on the learning side in terms of what are the learners experiencing here? What's the point of each, kind of thing I'm putting in this package? And relying more and more on other folks to kind of have the graphic design and the eye to that, and the what can the software do to create the kind of learning that I'm trying to get out of it, right? So I think it is. I mean, it's very helpful for me still to be pretty in touch with, what can the tools do, so that I'm, kind of aware of my constraints. Although it's probably the folks that I work with would probably wish I was more in touch with the constraints of the, can't we make it do this? Can't we, ever the optimist? Yeah, so I think that's probably, I definitely feel like graphic design is something that is a particular art that I don't have.
Sure. No, and that's actually, it's really interesting you make that distinction. Other people on the show have made that clear distinction as well. And I think it's something that many people, especially now with the couple of years of experience of being online for most instructors or teachers, there's a lamentation there. There's kind of like, I want it to look good, or I want it to be, modern and sexy and all those things, but I just don't know how to do it, or I can't. And there's a lot of frustration around that. But we also have to sort of be forgiving, because it's its own unique skill set. Graphic design, those things, it really is a unique skill set. And it's something that we probably shouldn't ask instructors and learning designers to have. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because it is, I think, a very specific skill set. On the other hand, do we actually need that for learning to take place, right? So there's kind of I don't know if you're a Kathy Moore follower, but this
We love Kathy Moore. Sure.
yes, well, she in recommending Twine, I don't know if you've ever worked with it, but very bare bones. I mean, you could have a very, simple user interface that folks are working with, but a pretty powerful, just by asking them to make decisions in something, where you're really focused on the applied and being able to see what the consequences of those are, kind of the branched choices, but very little on the user interface, although you can do more with it if you know kind of custom how to develop that. But very effective learning. So I think it's always a question of, how do you balance that, the effective learning piece with the design. I mean, you also want it to look good, and people can dismiss it immediately if you don't. But I think that's still a balance that I'm not sure. It may depend on the situation, what you need there.
So I think you've kind of inadvertently stumbled into sort of my next, sort of broad question I like. Is like, what are the greatest challenges from a person, in your position? Is it understanding that balance between what works and what's effective and what people think they want? Is it just starting a project? Is it managing, lots of stakeholders when, producing a piece of material? Like what are your top 2 or 3 challenges as,
Yeah.
a part of a decently sized structured system that you work within?
Yeah, I think, and I don't know if this is true for other folks, but and it could be I've kind of gone in the direction more of this user experience, kind of pulling that into instructional design, this like pulling in design thinking principles and trying to apply it to the instructional design process. But that has really highlighted for me the fact that a lot of times as instructional designers, we don't get access to our learners. And that is, in my mind, that's one of the biggest challenges for us, because we may have a client who's telling us this is what we need, right? But that might be coming from the client. And maybe if you dig in, and this is going back to Kathy Moore, I should just call this the Kathy Moore show. When you're doing the action mapping, right? And you're trying to find out like, what is the actual root cause here? So just continuing to ask why about these things. But I think key is, can you get me access to some learners for multiple places in the process, right? First of all, to find out, like, let's validate what the problem really is, right? If we get to talk to some learners, if we get to see what it is, do some observation or field research, if we get to see what it is that they're working with in terms of their environment and also the tools that they're already using, can we validate that the problem that we were told is the problem is actually the problem, and will training help with it? But beyond that, as you're designing and developing training solutions, putting that in front of some learners to see how they interact with it. Is it getting you what you designed, right? What you wanted out of it? So I don't know. Do you develop e-learning, or, I mean, even if you're
Yeah. Well, it's actually, it's funny you asked that, because something that my colleague Christian and I have proposed now in our office hours, which is a different broadcast that we do for our community of learners, is that we actually design a course. Actually, we actually build one kind of live without a net. And one of the hilarious parts about this is that, for all intents and purposes, we've been talking about e-learning. We've published a lot of articles about it. Like we're spokespeople for e-learning. But I don't build e-learning, right? Luckily, I work for this giant company that has lots of professionals,
lots of people who do,
so they can support us and whatnot. But I think it's going to be great to sort of have a public facing process of from the very moment of, let's pick what's our topic, to, what sort of pieces do we need to have it, where, what outcomes do we want, blah, 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 all the way to how do we assess it, and then how do we have analytics and those kinds of. So it's actually, you've kind of, we're rallying the flag.
Right. Well, as part of that process, I would challenge you to bring some learners in who would be, whoever your target audience would be, to actually watch them taking whatever you create. I mean, it doesn't have to be an e-learning course. It could be a job aid. It could be using whatever it is that you created, because that was a huge kind of light bulb for me. And this is usability testing from the UX, the user experience world. And there's some, definite techniques that are very non-trainer like. You do not step in and help. You are quiet, except for saying, and you get people to think out loud as they're going through something. And it also helps if you're not the person that designed whatever it is that they're testing, but getting them to use it. I mean, I think that has given me some of the biggest ahas on how do people use an e-learning course.
So that you've got two questions that now have popped up, or I'm interested in your observation. The first is, you threw on the table there something so casually that I think most of us don't think about, because we talk about online learning, we talk about remote learning, distance learning. We're in a remote work universe. I know that you don't live anywhere near the organization you work for, right? I don't either. Well, technically, my organization doesn't exist in a physical sense, right? Like we're just a global company. But pardon me. You said it doesn't have to be an e-learning course. It could be a job aid, or it could be some other thing. So, in your mind, as an instructional designer, how many different kinds of things is learning to you, right? Or how many different kinds of projects come across your desk, or are you, do you have this sort of menu of things that you propose, or maybe your clients come and say, hey, we have this and this, and then you can kind of open up your portfolio and be like, hey, well, we could do it one of these 15 different ways, like
right.
And again, sort of a basic question, but I think for many people who are here listening, that is a really important question, because we're just so indoctrinated into, here's my self-paced course. It's a video with some text, and you take an assessment video text, right? So what are the other, talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that the list is really long. Probably, you've got your classroom training, which is really really focused on, uh, in my mind, what classroom training is for. Number one, developing relationships, right? Part of that is like the networking aspect of it. The other part is application and case study, and that's really best done in a live setting if you can. Now, virtual classroom can do a lot of that too. So classroom, so instructor led training would be one thing, whether it's virtual or classroom based, and then performance support. And I know there's all this like, is that training, is it whatever, yeah, but job aids, even what a lot of people call micro learning, like short videos, whatever, that some of them probably fall into that performance support category, where it's like, and I have to tell you, having done a lot of user and learner observation now, that's actually what people need. And that's how people learn. They have a task they need to do, right? You think about your own, you have a task you need to do. You go out, you Google, you find a YouTube, whatever it is. So and you caught me at kind of the wrong time to ask that question, because I'm reading this book that is like, basically it's like you're creating experiences for people that are helping them care about something, or you're giving them resources for the things they already care about. And that's really what training should be. It's one or the other. I'm not sure I completely agree, but anyway, I'm struggling through that now. But before that, I would have said there is quite a long list. So, you have the kind of the instructor-led training, e-learning, the performance support, so job aids, and and within, there's all the video options, which can be, I think you can use some of these tools in very different ways. So a video could be a inspirational message. It could be part of that experience, right? That gets you to care about something. It's telling a story, or it's giving you the what's in it for me, or it can be a very quick step 1, 2, 3. Here's how I do this, So, I think a lot of these tools, you can kind of use them in very different ways. But I think, what I've learned over the years is definitely not to kind of accept on face value whatever the proposed solution is, but come in, dig a little deeper. Like, is that really what is going to help, solve whatever problem that you have? So I think I used to come with the, open up the like, well, choose from the menu, and probably now I'm much more selective. I keep that hidden and probably am helping to identify what the problem is, and being more proactive in recommending what the solution should be.
Cool. We actually have a comment here. William, I'm going to butcher his name, Budnik. I'm going to say William Budnik is his name. He says the urgency for knowledge and recall probably influences your design, I would assume.
Yes, absolutely. And Will, it's nice to see you. I haven't seen Will in probably 10 years. Well, I'm not actually seeing you, but yeah, it's probably been longer than 10 years. But anyway, I would say this is actually where I think we fall short in the L&D space. Is it takes us so long to turn something around. And I think it's like that nowadays we have to be faster with what we create. So what does that mean? Does that mean we spend less time on the interface, on the design, and we, try to focus on getting the content to folks as quickly as possible? So I think that's I think it hugely influences it.
Well, then also, and I also wonder about the ephemeral. I ask this a lot, is the ephemeral nature of training, especially in the sort of agile workforce universe that we live in now, where it's, it's design, MVP, prototype, blah, blah, blah. And,
Yeah.
put a product out, and then, you just Let's talk about mobile phones. I mean, there's a new one every 6 months for crying into the night, which means a new training manual, which means, new clicks and new this and that, right? And that's just one silly consumer example that everybody understands and knows about. And then if you think about, on the summit that we have, the eLearn Success Summit, there was a gentleman, Casper Spiro, who runs a learning company as well. And he talked about some consulting that he did where he was working with a Fortune 500 company or something like that. And they did an analysis of all of their training materials, a random selection, and none of them, 0, were up to date when they did their analysis, right? Like they all had some defect of some kind, like a little out of, and just, how do you keep up with this learning in the flow of work where the Google search is really sort of the standard? How do I do that thing? Thoughts there? I mean, like, any sort of innovative, hey, let's do this differently.
Yeah, I think I am going more and more leaning towards having the interface be simpler to allow us to develop faster. I'll give an example. Actually, it involves Twine of one thing that we had to turn around really quickly. I'm sure everybody in the training field probably experienced this at the start of the pandemic. In our organization, we had one particular area I was working with. They relied on classroom training, and they had these multi-day workshops, and people would come from all over the country, and they would meet together, and this is how they did training in their area. All of a sudden they can't do that at all.
Oh, that's right? You've just described the experience for like 85% of all people.
That's right. Yeah. So the question was, how do we do? And of course, at first it was like, well, we'll be able to go in a month or 2 or whatever, so there was a bit of a delay in figuring out that somehow we needed to provide this information in different ways. And so what we did was we actually took Twine and created almost like a decision tree guide where we asked folks a question like, does your content change? How often does it change? Every month, every 2 years? Is it, well, we first asked people to go through their workshop and kind of figure out like, okay, what were the different topics in their workshop? And could you separate some of those? Could we take some of them and then we take each one and we ask these questions about it? How often does it change? Does it require application, case study, kind of like, implementation of something, to try to, and we basically asked a series of questions that then ended in a recommendation, like, consider a webinar for this topic. It changes often. It's just a push of information. It's not, application based. It might be better to do it that way, and people can take it. You can record it and people can take it whenever they want, we use Twine to kind of help guide them through, like, for each topic that they had, what were the questions that could help them decide, can I do something different with this content? Can I send a presentation ahead of time? Probably one of my biggest pet peeves is going to a training, we've all been there, where it's just an information push, and the presentation that they could have just sent me that. I could have saved myself a lot of time, right? So like helping people see what's the value add for live training. It's if you can provide something, information ahead of time, and this flipped classroom approach, and then when you're together, you spend time talking about the questions that come up and the reflection on that content. So I think that was we were able, because we were using Twine, which is so simple, we were able to turn it around really quickly, and people could start using the tool almost immediately. So yeah. So
I want to remind everybody that you are listening to this live right now, and as we just saw, William came in and asked us, or put a little comment there. If you have a question, if you have an observation, if you have an experience or a challenge that you want to share with us, if you're a designer, if you're a teacher, instructor, throw it down. We love to hear it. Yesterday in our office hours, we actually had an ongoing conversation with two or three people about our process for building a course, and it's fantastic. So we'd love to hear from you. Naomi, hope this isn't too much of a I love it. I love asking curveball questions.
Oh, great.
Is how open in your experience and knowing the organization you work for, is, let's call it regimented. It's structured. It's, you would not consider it, a fast company, 100 flexible, agile organization, right? I'm being generous.
Yes.
But how open do you find, or would you find would your universe be to innovation, to innovative ways to learn, to design, to present, to, be a part of it, like even you said, like the flipped classroom is nothing new. It's been around for literally decades, but I mean, this thing like learning in the flow of work and micro learning and these kinds of concepts. Again, none of this is really new, as someone who's been reporting on this for a decade myself.
You've heard it all before.
Well, I mean, the pandemic just made this all of a sudden, front and center. But talk to me about like what's the appetite for being innovative or being comfortable in that. And
yeah,
go right ahead.
We actually have, despite being fairly structured and risk averse and all that good stuff, we've talked a lot about innovation. And I think the one big thing is things are changing so fast now. Both, I think, probably technology aligned with the pandemic. That's changing, how we are working. That I feel like we thought we were behind before, and now we're finding that we're a lot further behind. But I really do feel like we there's a strong emphasis on innovation. Now, where the rubber meets the road is, can we keep up with the technology from, security perspectives, from, purchasing perspectives that can help us get to that innovative place, right? Whatever, these things but not everything requires that technology investment or what have you. So I feel like where we can push quickly is in the innovation that doesn't require as much technology, right? And we can push a little bit faster there. So I am finding that there's a great space and it just happens in the last couple of years that's been a real emphasis in the organization. So I feel like there's a lot of people listen when you say, hey, this is not here's what's happening in the industry. Here's where I think we should go. And we've been doing a lot of kind of reflecting on what's our moonshot for the future. Like what are those disruptors in the training industry that might push us in a different direction, kind of idea. But yeah.
Well, let me push you one step further. Like, what's the appetite for a real, like, let's not even call it innovation, but just like a truly different perspective, like having someone come in from a very different place. And I'm thinking, like, what if you were to bring in a designer from, I don't know, the space program or from agriculture or just something that is not related to your industry at all, and have them say, oh, wow, hey, we don't do it that way at all. This is how we like. What would happen there? Would brains explode, or would you just kind of get some nice pat on the back, or what would happen?
I think that's actually something that is happening currently. So like bringing in outside, folks who have been in the industry, or even, and this is something that I feel is important for instructional designers and in the L&D industry on a whole, is we need to get a little closer to these other industries that are not, typical L&D, but like UX, like user experience, or design thinking, like change management, like marketing, like, kind of getting into these different areas. Cause I think that's where the innovation can really happen. They have, because when I look in the L&D space, even industry wide, I don't see such a huge gap. There's definitely, kind of people that are pushing the boundaries in different areas, but I think the real innovation happens when I look to the side, like outside the L&D industry, and start seeing some of what's happening there. But there is also a lot of push for, like, how is the work in AI? we're really trying to bring that in. Like, how is that going to affect what we do, but also the folks that we're creating training for, what they do. So, yeah. But I do think that that's kind of getting a little bit outside our L&D space is probably key to keeping us innovative.
100%. Yeah, I find it fascinating simply because I've been lucky enough to have a career arc that allows me to be that person who walks in the room and like, I know very little about what you do every day, but I see the problem and here's what I would do. What do you think of that? And so often it's really truly an innocent question, or it's an innocent, or a innocent observation that can spark the most true innovative thinking or true change or something like that, where it's just, hey, we just never even we didn't get outside our bubble, we didn't get that, those kind of things. Willem has another question for us, which is fantastic. I love it. Willem, he says that he finished his master's degree or his master's through online learning courses, but the most memorable experiences were when they had to interact with the other students offline. So in your organization, Naomi, how do you keep the human element? And this is obviously a challenge we've all had over the last couple of years, but now that things are opening up and we're kind of like, what is that juxtaposition? What is that? Is there a balance? Is there a blend of making sure humans actually connect?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could say no to that probably, but I will say it's going to be interesting to see how things play out, but in creating, I'm thinking of one particular multi-year effort on creating a curriculum, an e-learning curriculum. We were very intentional about building in these coaching components. So they would have an assigned person who would be their kind of point of contact. So we built in both into the learner guide that went along with the e-learning, all these questions that they should be asking their coach because they do things a little bit differently in their specific areas. And also just to, kind of help them dig in on applying some of this. And so we put in a lot of effort, putting together those questions. And then we created a coach's guide, with matching questions like be prepared to talk about and here's some points we think are important, and we have we do, regular check-ins with coaches and stuff. And then we watched some learners taking the e-learning and they completely ignored the whole thing. And so, I think you really need to test out what works and what people are hungry for, right? And when we did the testing and talking with the learners, we found out they were like, I don't want to bother. The coaches tended to be pretty senior, busy. I just am going to talk to my colleague, because, I can ask them a question and not look stupid or they can help me if they don't know, then we go more experienced. But so I think, Will, that's a great point of, what kind of interaction do you design? Because some may work and some may not. So the coaching thing may not have added as much as we hoped to the e-learning. Maybe we think about how do we get peers together, right? That are coming through these classes together. And this isn't an organized, they're in different locations across the country and they do things a little bit different in each location. So, there would be some challenges there, but, how do we add that? Because the additional learning is happening at that level where they're talking to their peers. So how do you help get those questions that we had for the coaches, right? Like, how do we have those conversations happen with their peers who they feel more comfortable in asking about?
So there were, in that question, there was one of those fun moments. Let's not call it uncomfortable moments where it's just like, hey, what we thought was going to happen didn't happen, right? I love to ask this question as well. Like over the years, is there a particular fail, or a particular, hey, like a client came and wanted this and we delivered it and it just did not happen, or people didn't show up, or the learning outcome was something totally different that you're able to share with us? Like,
Probably several, but the one that I'm thinking of immediately is the one where we were doing the usability testing with folks and watching how they took the e-learning courses, and I realized we had built in throughout the course several hyperlinked, like get more resources, here.
mm-hmm.
We had done it so often that nobody clicked on those. There were too many,
Mm-hmm.
and with our particular tool, it was opening a new window and they'd have to go find their course again. And, so in the end, I've been doing this for years. I've been overlinking people, right? And it's like discipline for the instructional designer. I have to think about like, what's the most important thing I want them to have? And then maybe instead of just having hyperlinked text all over the place, I'm calling out more specifically, okay, this one's important. This one I want you to click on. Everything else I can put in a kind of a resources space. And if people are interested, but just by, kind of realizing the things that you design that then they have adverse effects on how people are using and the only way to really know that is to watch some folks using it to find that out. But I would say that's a most recent fail.
There's nothing more humbling than watching someone use something you create, right?
Oh,
or
God.
it's just like it's the ultimate, like, if you're a writer, you don't want to let people see the draft, right, until it's published, or these kinds of things,
Yeah.
but yeah, once people see, you watch people use something you've created, that's when you're like, oh wow, that is,
yeah. And
gosh,
that's
how
where
did I not see that
right. Right. And that's where I feel like adopting an agile framework for more and more in the instructional design world could help us do that, because we're spending less time getting the first thing out there, and we can kind of get some feedback on that first thing, whatever that. Although I do have to say I struggle with what is an MVP? What is a minimum viable product for
sure.
e-learning, right? So what does that look like? I'm still working that through. If anybody has the answer, I'd be happy to hear.
There's a question. There's a question for the audience. What is an MVP in learning? I love it. While
Yeah.
people are thinking about that, you've just suggested, hey, we need to move to agile, or more. Like, how do you, as someone who's been doing this for quite a while now, it's easy to find yourself in a place where it's like, hey, look, I've got a really great base knowledge on this. But you even said earlier in our discussion, you're reading a book I love it. You're pushing back on the book and you're kind of challenging it yourself. How do you stay up to date? Like, and I think there's a two-part question here. How do you stay up to date? But then how many times, let's just say over the last 2 years, have you been like, holy smokes, there really is something different that I need to be doing here? Or once you have that base of knowledge, like any expert, is it incremental, or like how often does innovation happen in your brain, in your career?
I don't know if I've ever actually kind of taken stock of when it's
Yeah,
happening.
hey,
When do you
I
check
love
in,
asking
right?
questions that just come out of this little brain. It's always
Yeah, yeah. But I feel like lately, I mean, of course, I definitely industry conferences and even I'm a member of my local chapter of ATD, which is the training and development group in the US. And I think that's been really helpful to kind of have a peer group, kind of a community of practice that you can bounce things off of. Like, is this resonating? Are you exploring this? That kind of thing. And then, following folks on, I'm actually not on other social media, but on LinkedIn, just to kind of see what are they talking about right now, and keeping abreast of that. But I think that the other thing, and I think I mentioned this before, kind of exploring other fields has really been helpful. So like my venture into UX user experience I actually had a moment where I was like, I need to stop training,
and just
because
go do this. Yeah.
if I designed better interfaces, we would need less training. I'm like, I'm kind of, working myself out of a job, right? At least a lot of the software training. There's plenty of other places for training opportunities, but so that was kind of am I, taking stock of my own industry and figuring out, am I in the right place? And then I do feel like more recently I've been reading a lot. I think the connection from UX to design thinking has led me to like systems thinking and some other, just kind of exploring some of these things that have been around for quite a while. And exploring some of them through books, which is kind of a newer chapter in my life. I feel like, I mean, I've had a lot of books, but I don't know. I've been more, constantly reading something, at least books for work. So yeah, that's been something I've been exploring, and oftentimes those recommendations come from folks I'm following on LinkedIn. So like somebody will talk about something, and I'm like, oh, that's a really interesting concept, and so exploring it on your own.
Very cool.
Books. Yeah.
Well, so far this has been a fantastic conversation. We're actually, I can't believe it. We've had 50 minutes that have just flown by here. But there's one question I always ask my guests at the end of each conversation here, and that question is, what are you most excited about? In the near term. So 6 months, 12 months out, maybe even 18 if you want, but let's take it maybe into 2023. Is there a software product? Is there a process? You've obviously been talking about UX design here and everything, but maybe it could be an organization or a thing, like anything that you want to give a shout out to. It's just like you said, discovering something on LinkedIn that you think other people should check out. Are there names you could name or podcasts or whatever it is, whatever it might be?
Yeah, well, this is more of a concept, I guess, and this popped up a lot at the last DevLearn that I was at, but this idea of, and I think we all, like we all say we know this, but this idea of meeting learners at the moment of need, right? And there's kind of the 5 moments of need, but like thinking about how can we put resources in folks' hands more immediately. So, and how could we automate some of that? So whether it's a chat bot that's embedded in Teams or whatever platform that you Slack, whatever, that's able to help people get quick access to the kind of information they need in the workplace, like they do when they Google, something, like how can you put stuff in people's hands a lot faster? I feel like there's a lot of space there for us, for training folks to figure out how can we use some of that machine learning, artificial intelligence, to help us take something like a chatbot and really make it effective for training, remove some of the easy access to FAQs, or maybe it's actually recommending based on all your past history of learning and perhaps your job assignments into the near future. Here's some great recommendations for learning that you can have, and just, putting it on your plate to make it that much easier for folks to access. So that's something I'd love to see happen and make more accessible. As an LMS guy, I find some LMSs a little challenging. So,
Sure.
but are there ways we could build? I mean, maybe that is the LMS that has that layer of the chatbot that helps people really navigate, or improving the search, functionality. So anyway, that's something I'm interested in exploring.
Teaser here, and I thank you for teeing me up inadvertently. The eLearn Success Series here. In May, we have our instructor session, but in July, we have our EdTech, our Ed Nerd session. Ooh. And I know that one of our speakers comes from Warner Music, and he's going to talk about the no LMS, or the non-LMS learning ecosystem that they've implemented.
Very interesting. I might have to listen in on that.
I think, I'm super excited to hear how they've done that. He said that they've, it's really been a shift, like a really powerful shift to just not have this space you go to for learning. So that's really cool. Really cool.
Yeah.
Naomi Pusch, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day
Thanks, Stephen.
Today. I really, really appreciate it. I also want to thank Willem for putting some comments there and questions that we really appreciate. It makes it a little more lively here, but we will see you on the other side. Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the e-learning podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the e-learning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.